Hello, I'm Joshua of Milestone Play. Today, I wanted to take a look at player tips for high-level Dungeons& Dragons. High-level games are not a common thing in the D&D community, so I wanted to take the opportunity to allow players to have the best chance of fully experiencing a high-level game. These are going to be the topics we're going to talk about in a little bit, but before we get there, I do want to take the opportunity to show my biases. I personally do run high-level one-shots with a couple limitations on them, and they will color how I perceive the best way to make high-level characters. So, the first thing is I tend to run all of my Legendarium, my high-level one-shot games, in a single adventuring day. What I think this does is it helps consolidate some of the possible power gaps between players. I've had multiple players try and do something like cast the Hero's Feast spell, a high-level spell, the day before the adventure starts. That way, they get essentially a leg up on the situation. That is something that, while the entire party may benefit from it, I like to keep everything to a single day, keep the power flat across the board, but to help with that, I do like to consider what high-level spells might be being cast. Particularly for the spell Hero's Feast, there are many great bonuses that it gives to the entire party, and I do want to make sure that there are opportunities for those moments to shine. That way a player doesn't feel like they have wasted a high-level spell slot when they could have cast something else. Next up, I do allow any mundane items in the player's inventory. These are going to be high-level characters, so if they are capable of wearing a suit of plate mail, I let them have the plate mail. If they need very expensive spell components to cast their spells, I don't want that to be the limit. Their limit is the spells they choose for the day and the amount of spell slots they have. Nothing else should really be getting in the way of that. On the opposite side, though, I do not allow players to start off with magic items in my high-level one-shots. We only have a few hours to get through the session. Everyone's character sheets are full of abilities that need to be used, and having magic items is just going to layer on a couple of extra complications and things that may not even be gotten to throughout the game. One criticism I do have for this, and I take it to heart and I recognize it, is that no magic items means no magic weapons. If you do not have magic weapons, there are certain high-level enemies that will be resisting many of a fighter's attacks, or even fully being immune to them. I see this as a blessing and not a curse. A lot of times, the challenge rating system of 5th edition gets a bad rap for not really meaning anything, that a party of 15th level adventurers can wipe through a monster that's supposed to be a challenge for a party of level 25. One of the things that I do to get around this is I do enforce that no magic item rule. By doing this, when you have something like a demon prince enter the battlefield that may be immune to all non-magical weapon attacks, it very much brings that presence to the playing field of this is a major enemy and we have to figure out how to defeat this thing, or even change the objective of the mission entirely, because this is a pivotal, terrifying moment. Now, players may not like this, and to that, I have made an entire list of suggested character builds that can allow for you to still have a magic weapon if that's something you feel you need. The items that are in italics completely replace whatever your weapon's damage is with either a magical version or with some other form of energy that can bypass a no magic item limitation. Any item with an asterisk is going to be an ability that does a little bit of bonus damage, such as the divine strikes of a cleric or the improved smite of a paladin. Anything with a little sword next to it is a smite-like ability, which costs a resource but gives a lot of damage in a single bump. And then anything with the little double squiggle S parentheses mark, those are shareable powers. So you as a player don't even have to be the one to take these abilities. You could easily ask another player in the party, hey, I'm planning on playing a fighter. If your artificer has some room, maybe if you could pick up one of the infusions to give me a magic weapon, I would really love that. And as a third point to the no magic item clause, this is increasing the amount that players want to interact with each other and kind of buff each other as opposed to being focused on what their high-level character can do. So, we hit my limitations. I've shown my biases. I will be adding a couple extra things that will show up throughout my tips and tricks, but let's get into it. So, first up, we have having options available in combat. Now, it's okay to specialize for your character. A lot of people are going to do it, but there are a few basics that I do want all of my players to hit. This section might seem a little bit silly, but at high level play, it's kind of like a super soldier serum. High level games make the good things of D&D great, and they make the bad things even worse. I do suggest making sure that you have at least 3 of these 4 items. You don't have to hit all of them, but hitting most of them yourself will increase the enjoyment you have at the table, and hopefully your party members can fill in any gaps that you may have. The first is the easiest to hit, and that is going to be melee. Most characters will have some means of dealing melee damage, dealing damage to enemies directly adjacent to them. However, there are a couple notes. First of all, casters. You could be picking up a melee cantrip, or you could just be picking up a low-level spell like Inflict Wounds or possibly even Burning Hands. Anything that you can use to deal with close-by enemies that isn't going to devastate the rest of your party. It might be tempting to fireball yourself, but if you have another means out of the situation, I do suggest you take it. For ranged combatants, for archers, this melee stipulation might simply be have the ability to disengage as a bonus action. The other option is having the crossbow expert feat to allow yourself to attack adjacent enemies easily. As long as you have some means of dealing with the people directly around you, that is what I mean by having melee covered. It doesn't have to be a melee weapon, just a means of dealing with adjacent enemies. Next up, we do have ranged weapons. This note is especially for frontline fighters. For those rounds that you aren't immediately next to an enemy, I suggest having some kind of thrown weapon if you don't want to spend your turn dashing towards them. Sometimes you can't avoid taking a dash action, but if you have some means of dealing with a faraway enemy, it allows you to intersperse those rounds much more infrequently. If you do have space in your build, though, I do have something better than a thrown weapon. Attack cantrips. Attack cantrips are wonderful. Without multi-classing, there are a few ways to even get them. Feats like the Magic Initiate and the Strixhaven Initiate are wonderful ways that can give you 2 cantrips and a first level spell to supplement your character. The Strixhaven option can even be gotten as a background if you're really trying to squeeze it into your build. It might be a bit cheesy, but especially if we're playing a one-shot like I tend to run, we're not going to think too hard about it. Finally, both the Paladin and the Ranger do have means of getting cantrips through their fighting styles. So if you're not doing a build that heavily focuses on needing one of those fighting styles, perhaps picking up a couple cantrips there. While a hand axe is always handy, a 3rd or 4th tier cantrip is better in almost all cases. So from there, we move on to defense. Similar to melee, this is very much just a reminder to have something as a means of staying up if you happen to get swarmed. Having high hit points or armor class is the usual means of dealing with having a decent defense for yourself. However, other options include having a shield spell in your back pocket or some means of temporary hit points, such as Armor of Agathis. More specialized counters to being swarmed are the Conjuration Wizard's ability to castle with an ally using their benign transposition. Just make sure that you have some tactic to withstand a round or 2 of chaos, as your party members may have their hands full as well. Finally, mobility. This option is most likely to be shirked and the easiest for someone else to cover for you. However, there is nothing worse than being a melee-only character stuck on the other side of the battlefield. I personally like to include larger battlefields in some of my high-level encounters. Not every battlefield is going to be humongous, but there have been multiple high-level games where I have focused on having this grand aspect to what is going on. In that case, having something like Vortex Warp or Dimension Door are great ways of moving yourself or allies around the battlefield in these high-level encounters. Other options are Teleport, Transport via Plants, and Arcane Gate as a means of moving the entire party. For independent martial characters, feats such as Athlete, Charger, and Mobile can increase your movement across the battlefield, particularly Charger. I made a mention earlier that you may not want to be taking the dash action, but if you find yourself just a little too far away, the Charger feat is a good way of being able to get across the battlefield and then still being able to make an attack. This is actually much better for something like the Paladin or a Hexblade Warlock that can drop a Divine or Eldritch Smite with that single bonus action attack and still get a lot of damage done despite having to take the dash action. If you aren't going too crazy with your build, a 2-level dip into either Rogue or Monk can radically increase your mobility. However, if you are going to do it only for the mobility for big maps, maybe ask your Dungeon Master if large maps are going to be a feature of the particular one-shot you're running. I'm sure if it's a situation where you are only taking it for a specific worry, the Dungeon Master will nudge you in the right direction. The next point I want to hit out of the major points is to play into the plot. I don't have a whole lot of notes for this section because it's very varied, but play into the plot. A lot of times you'll be given a synopsis of what a game is going to be about. You'll be given a title of a one-shot. You will know the type of story you're going to tell. Don't shy away from that. If you're going after a lich in an army of undead, play the Paladin. Get the smites. It'll feel awesome. If you're going to be fighting a dragon, maybe pick up the Earthbind spell to try and pull them down to the ground so you don't have to deal with a flying dragon. Or at the very least, probably get through a couple of those legendary resistances as they resist coming down to you. There's plenty of different means of looking at what a one-shot is going to be about and then building towards it. It can be as simple as knowing that you're doing a dungeon crawl and making sure that either you or another player is playing a rogue capable of disarming many of the traps that may be involved. The biggest thing is to just not be sheepish about the game you're playing. It is not metagaming to look at a particular plot and go, we're going to be underwater? Yeah, I don't want to take water. No, take water breathing. Just take it. If something is going to be a key part of the game, you have 16, 17, 18 levels of character to fill. Make sure that at least some of it is built towards the particular adventure that is going to be run. I promise you, the Dungeon Master is not going to be upset, and everyone is going to have more fun because of it. The next topic I want to hit is playing into combat roles. When combat happens, it is likely to hit hard in a high-level game. Not paying too much attention to the particular classes that you are playing, we're more worried about filling the role that your character is meant to play. Paladins and rogues that can do a ton of damage to a single enemy with very few attacks per round should probably be targeting the biggest threat they can every round. Now, I have put the stipulation for my own games of no magic items, so if the rogue cannot hit the big bad with some form of immunity, redirect your attacks, but target the biggest thing that you can damage. From there, mobile fighters and monks and characters with a lot of attacks per round should probably be the ones cleaning up minions if that is a situation you find yourself in. Having more attacks allows you to more easily take out multiple problems rather than overkilling a single target. If there aren't any wandering threats, go ahead and prioritize the biggest problem to your party. Casters. Casters are a bit more varied, but follow some of the same threads. Utility casters should always have a concentration buff or debuff spell up. When attacking, target what the frontliners can't. If the big bad boss is immune to non-magical attacks, hit them with your biggest stuff. If a horde of minions is preventing your paladin from getting to the boss to smite them, incinerate the whole field. Your goal is to have the biggest impact possible each turn, whatever that means. The bad guys get lair actions. Your party gets you. Finally, healers. It is not glorious, but your job is valued. While the party is healthy, feel free to have fun. But D&D combat is a bit of a death spiral. The moment one person drops, others soon join. Whatever cool idea you had for your turn goes out the window the moment someone goes down. Get them back up ASAP. A wizard's 8th level spell slot is useless to the party if they're dead. Additionally, the spell Greater Restoration is more important than Raise Dead. For a 1 Adventuring Day one-shot, 99% of the resurrections you will do will be Revivify. If you get the Raise Dead spell for free as a domain spell or something like that, great. It may come up, it may be useful in the plot, it may be useful for story elements, but high-level monsters can wreak havoc with special abilities that Greater Restoration is a panacea for. If you have to choose between Raise Dead and Greater Restoration, go with Greater Restoration. A small pack of basilisks are a trivial encounter for a group of high-level adventurers. However, a single bad roll can remove a player from the game entirely through a petrified character that Greater Restoration can heal with a single action. I have highlighted spells throughout the previous couple sections. However, I do want to take a moment now to look at spell selection in general. High-level casters have a ton of spell slots and will probably be throwing out 4th and 5th level spells like their cantrips. While your high-level spells will be the kind of iconic and character-defining abilities that you will be presenting throughout the game, my tips are for what to do with those lower-level spell slots. You're going to have a lot of them, and they will be a major boon to the party if you can just figure out how to use them. I don't expect a party to have all of these spells, but this is a good list of things to go to if you need to fill out the last couple options of your prepared spells for the day. The first spells I want to point out are answers to some of the problems I did create with my limitations earlier. Specifically, the no magic items rule. I already gave you a big list of means of dealing with the magic weapon, but when in doubt, the magic weapon spell is the player handbook's answer to that problem before you even add any magic weapons into your campaigns in the first place. Additionally, some characters benefit from short rests much more than others, and high-level plot lines can be rapidly paced when they are limited to a single day. The catnap spell can be an efficient way for your warlock, monk, and fighter to get a short rest in while your wizard completes some rituals and the rogue disables a complex trap. Moving on, the next useful spells are meant to be opening up your action economy to get through as much of your battery of spell slots as possible before the session ends. Spiritual Weapon can open up a consistent bonus action in combat if you don't already have a bonus action for you. Reactionary spells to prevent damage increase how many high-level abilities your party can get off before anything bad happens any players may drop. While Counterspell and Silvery Barbs make quite the stir in the community, Absorb Elements and Shield always work when they're triggered and never need more than the lowest available spell slot that you have. Also overshadowed by Counterspell is Dispel Magic, despite the fact that I have had Dispel Magic alter my stories far more often than Counterspell. Joining Dispel Magic is Remove Curse and Ceremony that serve as the backbone of creative magics to interface with the environment. Misty Step and Vortex Warp do fit a point that I made earlier about a means of mobility for you or other party members and are always good go-tos. Finally, the last category of spells that I want to look at are long-lasting buffing spells that don't require concentration. Some of these last an hour, some last 8 hours. You want to look at the durations before casting, but really the only thing that changes is if you want to cast these at the beginning of the adventuring day or after a possible short rest. Similar to the always useful spells, you don't have to have all of these. Depending on the one-shot, certain ones will be much more useful than others. Only a few of these have a range of self. Of note, while the Mage Armor spell is often cast on self, it can actually be cast on others and is a great way to help protect vulnerable NPCs if they come up in the plot. If you have no other use for your first level spell slots, picking up something like Gift of Alacrity or Longstrider could be just the thing you need to give yourself a little bit of breathing room by passing it out to all of the party members to make those overwhelming encounters a little bit more manageable. Finally, I do have 2 notes for specific classes. I could go through all of the classes and nitpick all the way through, but these are just a couple things that I have noticed throughout the games that I have played. First up, we do have the Cleric. Please, do not use your Divine Intervention mid-combat. It might seem like the opportunity for an awesome story in the making, but most of the time, it just leads to failure and a wasted action. Your action is highly valuable and not to be wasted on something with a minimum of an 81% chance of failure. Now, if you are level 20 and Divine Intervention is automatic, throw this tip out the window. But until that point, please use your Divine Intervention early and outside of combat. Give it a chance to change the entire one-shot, and if nothing happens, you still have all of your actions throughout a combat to make of the most use possible. The final note I have is for wizards. This is something that most people know, but in case you miss it, it is useful. This is specifically for my high-level one-shots that take place over a single adventuring day. Any spellbook spells that you have that are beyond your daily preparation limit as a caster, you should make those ritual spells. You won't have any really ability to switch out your prepared spells if this is all happening in a single adventuring day. So having them as rituals guarantees that all of those options are available to you throughout the entire game, as opposed to locked away behind a technicality. I hope you found something useful in this video for a high-level gameplay for players in D&D. Thank you for watching. This video has been made possible by my supporters on Patreon. If you would like to support me there or hire me for a game, all of my links can be found down in the doobly-doo. And thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.